My name's Piper, and I guess it all started when I was born. My folks, they had this weird joke about me being a rich girl with my own house. Didn't make any sense to me back then, and I didn't think much of it. Mom and Dad, they were trying for another kid after me. But it never worked out. Mom kept losing the babies, and I could see it was tearing her up inside. I was just a kid, maybe 6 or 7, when I first noticed how sad she'd get sometimes. I didn't understand then why it mattered so much. I was happy being an only child. I got all the attention, all the toys, but looking back I can see how much it hurt Mom not to have another baby. Life went on like that for a while. Me, growing up, not really understanding the undercurrents in our family. Mom and Dad, putting on brave faces but struggling behind the scenes. It wasn't perfect, but it was normal. At least it was my normal. Then, when I was 10, everything changed. I remember that day like it was yesterday. I was sitting at the kitchen table doing my homework when the phone rang. Mom answered it, and I watched her face go pale. "What do you mean there's been an accident?" she said, her voice shaking. I felt my stomach drop. Something was wrong, really wrong. Mom hung up the phone and turned to me, tears in her eyes. "Piper, honey, we need to go to the hospital. Dad's been in a car accident." The next few hours were a blur. The hospital waiting room, the smell of disinfectant, the doctors with their grim faces, and then, the news that turned our world upside down. Dad didn't make it. The funeral was awful. All these people I barely knew, telling me how sorry they were, how Dad was in a better place now. I didn't want him in a better place. I wanted him here with us. After the funeral, things got weird. Dad's parents, my grandparents, started coming around a lot more. They'd always been nice, but now they were practically living at our house. They'd bring food, help Mom with the bills, take me out for ice cream. Mom, she was a mess. Some days she wouldn't get out of bed. Other days she'd be manic, cleaning the house from top to bottom or rearranging all the furniture. I never knew what to expect when I came home from school. One day, about 6 months after Dad died, I came home to find Mom all dressed up. She was wearing makeup for the first time in months, and she'd done her hair. "Piper, honey," she said, a weird, forced cheerfulness in her voice. "I've got some news. I've met someone. His name is Tom. He's very nice. I think you'll like him." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. It felt like a betrayal, like she was trying to replace Dad. But I could see a spark in her eyes that I hadn't seen in months, and I didn't want to be the one to snuff it out. It didn't take long for Mom to bring Tom home. One day I came back from school, and there he was, sitting in Dad's chair like he owned the place. "Piper, this is Tom," Mom said, all smiles. "He'll be living with us now." From that day on, everything changed. Tom started setting up his own rules like he was the boss or something. But what he did next, I'll never forget. One Saturday morning, I woke up to find Tom in the living room, a big trash bag in his hands. He was going around collecting all the photos of Dad. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice shaking. Tom barely looked at me. "Getting rid of old stuff. Your mom agreed it's time to move on." I couldn't believe it. I watched as he shoved photo after photo into the bag. Pictures of Dad and me at the beach, Dad teaching me to ride a bike, our last family vacation. When he was done, Tom thrust the bag at me. "Take this to the trash, will you? I'm your father now, the only father you need. It's time to forget about the past." I grabbed the bag and ran out of the house, tears streaming down my face. I didn't stop until I reached my grandparents' house. Grandma opened the door, took one look at me, and pulled me into a hug. "Oh, Piper, what's wrong?" Between sobs, I told her and Grandpa what happened. They were furious. "How dare she?" Grandpa growled, picking up the phone to call Mom. I could hear Mom's voice on the other end, getting louder and angrier. "If you're going to lecture me about how to live my life, maybe you shouldn't see Piper anymore." She hung up, and that was that. When I got home, Mom was waiting. "Honey, we need to move on. Tom is your father now. You need to call him Dad." From then on, every time I called Tom by his name, Mom would correct me. "Dad," she'd say, giving me a pointed look. "You mean Dad." I felt so alone. It was like I'd lost both my parents, not just Dad. Mom was different now, always trying to please Tom and his precious rules. Then, out of the blue, Tom's son from his first marriage showed up. Jake was a few years older than me, and Mom fell all over herself trying to make him feel welcome. "Jake, why don't you take Piper's room?" Mom suggested one day. "It's the biggest, and you need your space." So, just like that, I was moved to a tiny room that used to be Dad's office. I watched as they repainted my old room, bought new furniture, and treated Jake like he was some kind of prince. One night, I overheard Mom and Tom talking. "I'm so glad Jake's here," Mom was saying. "It's good for Piper to have a brother figure." Tom grunted in agreement. "Yeah, Jake's a good kid. Unlike some." I didn't need to hear the rest to know he was talking about me. I curled up in my bed, feeling more alone than ever. This wasn't my family anymore. This wasn't my home. Things at home got worse after Jake moved in. Mom started sending me to my grandparents more and more. At first, it was just weekends. Then it was every holiday and school break. I didn't mind at first. It was a break from Tom and Jake, and Grandma always made my favorite cookies. But then one day, Mom sat me down with this weird smile on her face. "Piper, honey, I've been thinking. How would you like to live with Grandma and Grandpa full-time? Well, they love you so much, and you always have such fun there. Don't you think it would be nice?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But this is my home. I want to stay here. Mom's smile faded. "Piper, don't be difficult. This is what's best for everyone." I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg her not to send me away, but I could see in her eyes that her mind was made up. A week later, Mom dropped the next bomb. "I've enrolled you in a new school," she said casually over dinner. "It's closer to your grandparents' house. It'll be more convenient for everyone." And just like that, my whole life was turned upside down. I had to say goodbye to my friends, pack up my room, what was left of it after Jake took over, and move in with Grandma and Grandpa. The new school was awful. I didn't know anyone, and everyone already had their friend groups. I'd sit alone at lunch, missing my old friends and wondering what they were doing without me. The stress of it all started getting to me. I couldn't sleep, I lost my appetite, and I started falling behind in class. Grandma noticed and got worried. "Piper, dear," she said one day, "I think it might help if you talk to someone about all this. I've made an appointment with a psychologist." So, I started seeing Dr. Roberts every week. At first, I didn't want to talk. What was I supposed to say? That my mom didn't want me anymore? That I missed my old life so much it physically hurt? But Dr. Roberts was patient. She'd just sit there waiting for me to be ready, and eventually the words started coming out. "I don't understand," I sobbed one session. "Why doesn't she want me anymore? What did I do wrong?" Dr. Roberts handed me a tissue. "Piper, this isn't your fault. Sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love, even if they don't mean to." It helped a little, talking to Dr. Roberts. But it didn't change the fact that Mom barely visited. She'd show up on major holidays, armed with presents and forced cheer, but she never invited me back home. High school graduation day. I stood there in my cap and gown, searching the crowd for a face I knew wouldn't be there. Mom hadn't come. Not that I was surprised, but it still hurt like hell. Later that night, as I was helping Grandma clean up after the small celebration they'd thrown for me, my phone rang. It was Mom. "Hey, Piper," she said, sounding distracted. "Congratulations. So what are your plans now?" For a moment, I felt a spark of hope. Was she actually interested in my life? "I got into State University," I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. "I'll be moving to the city in the fall." "Oh, that's wonderful," Mom exclaimed, sounding genuinely happy for the first time in years. "The city, huh? That's great." But as she kept talking, I realized she wasn't excited about my achievement. She was excited that I was leaving town, getting further away from her. College was different. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. No one knew my sad backstory. I was just Piper, the girl from a small town, trying to figure out life like everyone else. I made friends, joined clubs, even went on a few dates. But I never brought anyone home for the holidays. How could I explain my situation? "Oh, I live with my grandparents because my mom didn't want me anymore." Yeah, that'd go over well. I'd visit Grandma and Grandpa during breaks, but I never went to see Mom. She never invited me, and I was done trying to force my way into her life. 4 years flew by, and suddenly I was graduating again. This time, Grandma and Grandpa were there, beaming with pride. But Grandpa looked tired, older than I remembered. A month after I moved back home, Grandpa passed away. It was a long illness, the doctors said, but it still felt sudden to me. One day he was there, telling his corny jokes, and the next, he wasn't. After that, it was just me and Grandma. I got a job in town and tried to take care of her, but she was getting frailer by the day. One morning, Grandma sat me down at the kitchen table. "Piper, dear," she said, her hands shaking slightly as she held her coffee mup. "I need to talk to you about something." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What is it, Grandma?" She took a deep breath. "I've been thinking. I think it's time for me to move to a nursing home." I was shocked. "What?" "No, Grandma, I can take care of you. You don't need to." She held up a hand to stop me. "Piper, listen. I've thought this through. I've even saved up for it. This isn't your responsibility, dear. You're young, you should be living your life, not taking care of an old woman." I wanted to argue, but I could see the determination in her eyes. So we found a nice place not too far from town. It broke my heart to leave her there, but she seemed relieved. I'd visit her as often as I could, bringing her favorite snacks and magazines. We'd text each other silly memes and cat videos. It wasn't the same as living together, but we made it work. Life has a funny way of moving on, even when you're not ready for it. I settled into a routine, living in Grandma's house, working my 9-to-5 job, and trying to build some semblance of a normal life. I made friends, went on dates, even took a pottery class. Just normal, 20-something stuff. But then, one rainy Tuesday morning, I got the call I'd been dreading. Grandma had passed away in her sleep. In a daze, I called Mom. I don't know why, habit, I guess. Or maybe some desperate hope that in this moment she'd be the mother I needed. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking. "Grandma's gone. She died last night." There was a pause, and then, "Well, it's about time. That nasty old woman lived long enough." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom, how can you say that? She was your mother-in-law. She took care of me when..." "When what, Piper?" Mom cut me off. "When I couldn't. Is that what you were going to say?" I was speechless. Mom filled the silence. "Look, I'm not coming to the funeral. You're probably the heir anyway, so you can handle it. Consider it payback for all she did for you." And then she hung up. Just like that. The next few days were a blur. I arranged the funeral, picked out flowers, wrote the obituary. All the while, a part of me kept expecting Mom to show up, to help, to at least pretend to care. But she never did. After it was all over, Grandma's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, asked me to stay behind. "There's the matter of the will," he said gently. I nodded, not really caring. What did it matter now? Mr. Peterson cleared his throat and started reading. "To my beloved granddaughter, Piper, I leave my house and all my savings." I wasn't surprised. I'd been living in Grandma's house for years now. But then Mr. Peterson continued, "I also leave to Piper the house at 1542 Maple Street." I frowned. 1542 Maple Street? But that's my childhood home, where Mom lives now. Mr. Peterson nodded. "Yes, it is. Your grandmother owned that house." My mind was reeling. "But I don't understand. I thought that was Mom's house." "There's a letter," Mr. Peterson said, handing me an envelope. "Your grandmother wanted you to have this." With shaking hands, I opened it and started reading. "My dearest Piper, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I wish I could have stayed with you forever. There's something you need to know. The house where your mother lives, it was never hers. It was mine and your grandfather's. We let your parents live there when they got married, but it was always meant for you. Your mother, she's made a lot of mistakes, Piper. Letting you go was the biggest one. I couldn't stand by and watch her push you out of your own inheritance. So I'm setting things right. Remember, this house officially became yours at the moment of your coming of age. All my love. Grandma. I sat there, stunned. And then, like a flash, I remembered. All those years ago, Mom and Dad joking about me being a rich girl and a landlord. It hadn't been a joke at all. Mr. Peterson was saying something about property taxes and transferring the deed, but I barely heard him. My mind was racing. What was I supposed to do now? Kick my own mother out of her house, let her stay. After a few sleepless nights, I decided it was time to face the music. I needed to see my house with my own eyes. I tried calling Mom first, thinking it'd be the decent thing to do. No answer. I left a voicemail, sent a text. Nothing. Typical. So, on a sunny Saturday morning, I found myself driving down Maple Street, my stomach in knots. As I pulled up to the familiar driveway, I almost didn't recognize the place. The once pristine lawn was overgrown, the paint was peeling, and the front porch looked like it might collapse any minute. I took a deep breath and got out of the car. Before I could even reach the front door, it swung open. There stood Mom, and my jaw nearly hit the ground. She looked old, tired. But there was something else. Her hand rested on a noticeably swollen belly. "Mom," I stammered. "Are you pregnant?" She sighed, looking annoyed. "Yes, if you must know. Tom and I have been trying for years. Third round of IVF finally took." My head was spinning. "A baby? Now? After all this time? Can I come in?" I asked, trying to peek around her into the house I once called home. Mom stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind her. "I wasn't expecting visitors. This isn't a good time." I couldn't believe it. My own mother was treating me like a door-to-door salesman. "Fine," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "We can talk out here." I reached into my bag and pulled out the copy of Grandma's will. "Mom, there's something you need to know. About the house. Grandma left it to me in her will. It belongs to me now, legally." She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You're out of your mind. This is my house. Mine and Tom's." I shook my head. "No, Mom. It's not. It never was. Grandma and Grandpa let you live here, but it was always meant for me." I could see the realization dawning on her face, quickly replaced by rage. "You ungrateful little trash," she spat. "After everything we've done for you." "Everything you've done for me," I interrupted, my own anger finally bubbling over. "You threw me away, Mom. You chose your new family over me." She opened her mouth to argue, but I pressed on. "Look, I'm not here to kick you out. But you need to start paying rent. It's only fair." Mom's face turned an alarming shade of red. She started screaming, hurling insults and curses at me that I never thought I'd hear from my own mother's mouth. The commotion must have attracted Tom's attention because suddenly he was there, looming over me with a face like thunder. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. Mom, still seething, pointed at me. "She says the house is hers. That we need to pay her rent." Tom's eyes narrowed. He took a step towards me, his voice low and menacing. "Listen here, you little shit. This is our home. If you think you can come here and threaten us." I backed away, suddenly very aware of how alone I was. "I'm not threatening anyone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just telling you the facts. We can talk about this like adults, or we can let the lawyers handle it." Tom took another step forward. "Get off my property before I call the cops." I retreated to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. As I drove away, I could see Mom and Tom in the rearview mirror, still yelling. After that confrontation with Mom and Tom, I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't want to fight, didn't want to cause trouble. Maybe I should just let it all go, I thought. Forget about the house, forget about the inheritance. It wasn't worth tearing apart what little family I had left. But then, a couple days later, all hell broke loose. I was scrolling through Facebook on my lunch break when I saw it. A post from Mom, shared by Jake, my stepbrother. My blood ran cold as I read. "Please pray for us. My ungrateful daughter is trying to kick us out of our home. I'm 5 months pregnant and she wants to make us homeless. How could she do this to her own mother? The comments were flooding in. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, old family friends, even some of Mom's co-workers. All of them outraged on her behalf, calling me every name in the book. My phone started blowing up. Texts, calls, DMs. Everyone wanting to know how I could be so heartless, so cruel. It went on and on. With each message, each hateful comment, I felt myself getting angrier. This wasn't fair. They didn't know the truth. They had no idea what I'd been through, what Mom had done. I sat there, staring at my phone, shaking with rage. And then something inside me snapped. Screw this, I muttered, opening up Facebook. I started typing, my fingers flying over the keyboard. I've stayed quiet for years, but I can't anymore. Here's the truth about my loving mother. I laid it all out. How she'd abandoned me after Dad died. How she'd shipped me off to my grandparents. How she'd barely been a part of my life for years. I uploaded pictures of Grandma's will, of her letter explaining everything. I never wanted to kick anyone out, I wrote. I just wanted what was rightfully mine, what my grandparents always intended for me to have. But my mother would rather lie and manipulate everyone than face the truth of what she's done. I hit post before I could second-guess myself. Then I turned off my phone and went back to work, my heart pounding. When I checked my phone again hours later, I was overwhelmed. The tide had turned. Now it was messages of support, of shock, of apology. My post had been shared hundreds of times. People were tagging Mom, demanding she explain herself. Jake had taken down his post. It was like a dam had broken, and years of hidden truth were finally flowing free. As I sat there, my phone buzzing with more messages of support, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: strength, determination. I'd spent years trying to shrink myself, to avoid conflict, to make everyone else comfortable at my own expense. No more. I picked up my phone and called Mr. Peterson, Grandma's lawyer. Mr. Peterson, it's Piper. I think it's time we discuss my options regarding the house on Maple Street. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings, paperwork, and court appearances. Mr. Peterson was a godsend, guiding me through the complex process of reclaiming what was rightfully mine. We're not just going after the house, he explained one day. We're seeking compensation for the 6 years they lived there rent-free, plus damages for concealing your ownership. The day of the trial arrived. I walked into the courtroom, my heart pounding, and there they were, Mom and Tom, looking like they'd aged years in just a few months. As the trial progressed, I watched Mom pull out all the stops. She cried, she pleaded, she painted me as a monster who was trying to make a pregnant woman homeless. Your Honor, she sobbed, her hand on her swollen belly, how can my own daughter do this to me? To her unborn sibling. I kept my face neutral, even as I felt my blood boiling. Mr. Peterson squeezed my arm reassuringly. Your Honor, he said when it was our turn, the facts are clear. The house belongs to my client. It was left to her by her grandparents, who always intended it to be hers. The defendants have been living there rent-free the 6 years, since Piper came of age, all while keeping Miss Henderson in the dark about her rightful ownership. The judge listened carefully, asked questions, reviewed the evidence, and then, finally, he made his decision. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, he announced. The defendants are to vacate the property within 30 days and pay compensation for back rent and damages. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. We'd won. Mom's scream of outrage echoed through the courtroom. You can't do this, she yelled, as Tom tried to hold her back. She's no daughter of mine. As they were let out, Mom's eyes met mine. The hatred I saw there made me flinch. But I stood my ground. This was justice, not revenge. A month later, I stood on the sidewalk in front of my childhood home, watching as Mom and Tom loaded the last of their belongings into a moving truck. The sheriff was there, overseeing the eviction to make sure everything went smoothly. You'll regret this, Mom hissed as she walked past me. You're dead to me, you hear? Dead? Tom just glared, muttering curses under his breath, but with the sheriff standing right there, neither of them dared do more than that. As I watched them drive away, I felt empty. This was supposed to be a victory, right? So why didn't it feel like one? I walked through my house now, truly and legally. It needed work, a lot of work. But as I stood in what used to be my childhood bedroom, I knew I couldn't live here. Too many memories, too much pain. So I made a decision. I called a realtor and put the house up for rent. The income from that, plus the compensation from the lawsuit, gave me a solid financial foundation. And for the first time in my life, I started thinking about what I wanted. I'd always had a passion for baking. My cookies were famous among my friends, and I'd even sold a few custom cakes for coworkers' birthdays. So why not turn that into a business? I enrolled in a small business management course at the local community college, started researching commercial kitchen rentals, began drafting a business plan for Piper's Sweet Treats. It wasn't going to be easy, I knew that. But for once, I was looking forward to seeing what tomorrow would bring.